Welcome to the Project Management Coaching Podcast with certified trainer and project management expert, Dan Ryan.
Hello, everybody. This is Coach Dan Ryan, and I'm known as the PM Tutor and the PM Exam Coach, and I help people pass the PMP Exam. And I'm very excited because joining me today is Nelson Dellis, a memorization specialist, coach, trainer, and keynote speaker. Now, Nelson is a four-time USA memory champion with appearances on popular TV shows, and he is known as a memory expert. And today we're going to get a chance to speak to him about his journey to becoming a memory champion and how regular project managers like you and I could benefit, perhaps, from some of his methods. All right, now, Nelson, you can see more information about Nelson by going to nelsondellis.com. All right, and I should point out that Nelson has a book called Remember It, which is going to be coming out in September, but it is currently available for pre-order just about everywhere. All right, so Nelson, welcome to the show.
Hey, Dan, thanks for having me.
Really great to have you. All right, let's jump right in here. So let me just ask you, how does somebody become a memory champion?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, most people think that to become a memory champion, you have to have some sort of pre-existing superior memory, just naturally something you're born with. But memory is actually something that is trained and taught. People who have good memories, it comes from them actually using it and training it, using techniques and practicing every day. So I had heard about this competition a number of years ago, and I was inspired by my grandmother who had struggled with Alzheimer's to see if I could actually get good at this memorizing stuff. And in a short amount of time, I was very obsessed, so I would train almost every minute of the day if I could. I eventually got good enough to win a championship.
Wow, that's awesome. And I'm sure your grandma would be real proud of you. Let me ask you a question. When do you think it was that you first noticed that, hey, you know what, I'm good at remembering things? When did you first learn that about yourself?
Yeah, so I mean, I'd heard about a U.S. memory championship, and I also heard that, people with regular memories were competing. It was just they had trained with some techniques. So the next question was, okay, what are these techniques and where can I learn them? So I discovered a couple books, an audiobook in particular that I latched onto, which was spoken by a former UK memory champion. And he taught some techniques. I tried them. I was a little reluctant at first because I didn't think I had a very good memory, and my mnemonic confidence probably wasn't that high. But in a short period of time, I realized that, I'm actually quite good at this. And a lot of people ask me that question, but it's not so much, hey, when did you find out that you were good at this? It's we're all good at this. This is something that we naturally all can do as long as you have the tools to access that powerful memory. And then, if you want to argue, okay, how did you know you were good enough to be a champion? That just comes with practice. Like any other skill, if you want it bad enough, you'll work hard at it.
So like anything else, you get into something, you start practicing it, and then you start to realize, hey, I got a real proclivity for this. And then you just kept taking it to the next level. Yeah.
I had a passion for it. I love training my memory for hours a day, which kind of sounds kind of boring, but it's a lot of fun for me. And
all right, give me an example. Just give me one quick example of how you could see one of the things you did when you sat around training your memory for hours every day. What'd you do?
Yeah, so I'm training for what events they have at the competition. And so those events, for example, would be memorizing a deck of cards. So that's something I would do every day, multiple times.
Now, when you say memorize a deck of cards, are you talking about you shuffle it into a certain order?
Exactly. Yeah. So it's shuffled into a random order. I give it a good shuffle, and then I'm looking at this deck of cards that I have no prior knowledge about, and I time myself to see how quickly I can memorize from, card 1 to card 52, and I have the whole thing in order.
Oh my God! And I saw that it said you did it in 42 seconds.
In a competition, my best is 40 seconds. Yeah.
Wow. Now, how did they verify that? Did they take the card deck and you have to say it back to them or something?
Yeah, good question. So they actually take out a brand new deck of cards, and you have to put it in order by memory, same as the one that you just looked at. And then when that's done, there's a judge. They flip over both decks at the same time, and you can match the cards.
And so you put the new deck into the right sequence in 40 seconds?
No, so the memorization, the time that I'm looking at the cards is 40 seconds.
Okay.
Yeah. You get 5 minutes to put back the deck. So the recall speed isn't really that important. It's how much time did you look at the cards, right? That's the actual memorization part, right?
Gotcha. That is amazing. I don't think if I had, a couple of hours, I don't think I could memorize cards, but you could probably teach me how to do it. But let me ask you, in terms of normal things in life that people can do to enhance their memory. Now, I've heard lots of things over the years like exercise or diet, or, they have this stuff, I don't even know, ginkgo or ginseng, or is it true? Yeah. Is there any truth that there are certain foods from Asia or certain things, vitamins or supplements that you can drink that will have a direct impact on your memory?
I believe so. I take something every day that, I'm training so much that I take a lot of notes, and I can see when I'm doing best and when I have kind of a lull in my performance. And sometimes it does have to do with these external factors like sleep, exercise, and diet. So what I've noticed with my diet is I always try to get in DHA omega-3. That's a fatty acid that you typically find eating fish.
My wife constantly says that things like salmon, they're really good for your brain.
Exactly. And it is. I don't eat a ton of fish, so I do love salmon, but I don't eat a ton of it. So I take, you could take like a fish oil pill. They typically have a certain amount of milligrams of DHA omega-3, and that's what I religiously take every day. And then aside from that, it's just kind of like a balanced diet. I mean, if you're eating just garbage food and a lot of sugars, you're going to have a cloudy mind, and when you eat healthy and you cut down on these processed foods and sugars, you get a lot more clear in your mind, and that leads to better focus, and that leads to better memory.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I'm gonna start looking at some of those those fish oils, definitely. Now, let me ask you this, Nelson. As you got into the memory experiences that you were doing and you started to work your way up through this journey and getting better and better, I'm just curious, how does it come to a point where you say, hey, you know what? This is more than just a hobby, having a great memory. I actually can make an impact on the world. I could make a living out of this. I mean, I don't want to ask you your personal finances, but how do you wind up, how do you monetize an amazing memory? I know you're going to win competitions and there's certain benefits from that, but are there corporate companies out there that want to have you speak to them, or how does it work? How do you really, incorporate this into
get by? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, if you told me 10 years ago that my career would be teaching people how to memorize stuff, I would have laughed at you. But it's something, I think why it is something that I can get by on is because everybody has a memory and everybody benefits from an improved memory, no matter what you do. So there's that, right? And that's why, I get asked by all sorts of people. On some sides, like you said, it's a corporate thing. I get a lot of businesses asking me to come speak for their employees and for their teams to help them be more efficient, or to help them memorize, some large corpus of information that they need to know. But it doesn't stop there. There's students that need my help who are studying for an exam. There's athletes that have to remember plays and be sharp on the court or on the field. And then there's businessmen who just need to remember people's names, something as simple as that, because that'll increase their relationships and their networking.
That's awesome. Let me ask you a question here, and I'm getting off track a little bit, but my father, he had one of the most amazing memories for remembering arguments. Right?
Okay.
You said that I told you, no, I never said that. No, here's exactly what you said, I would say, right? And I swear it would be 20 years later, and he would remember. And I always thought to myself, God almighty, how does he remember that argument we had in the kitchen 20 years ago? I wonder if emotion being connected to an event, I know exactly where I was on the day of 9/11, what window I was looking into, what was on the television, How does emotional connections, work with the memory stuff?
Yeah, that's a great point you bring up. A lot of how I memorize things and how other professional memorizers memorize things is they tie these associations to things that are meaningless, but associations to things that are emotionally charged, that evoke some kind of emotional response, whether it be something sad, positive, hilarious, uncomfortable, whatever. Those are the things we tend to memorize in extraordinary detail versus the mundane, which makes sense, right? If it's not memorable, you're not going to remember it. So,
Not going to stick with you.
yeah. So whenever we're trying to memorize something, whether it's a deck of cards or someone's name, the goal is always to try to turn that kind of bland piece of information into something that we can picture in our mind that has all these tagged emotions and associations to it from our rich, bank of memories and experiences, right? We all have a treasure trove of those. And if you can connect those to things that have no meaning, then it suddenly will have meaning.
Now, Nelson, does this start to tie into a concept that I think I saw when you were on Dr. Gupta's show where you talk about a memory palace, or is that something different?
Yeah, I mean, it plays off of that. So
Tell us about, give us the Reader Digest version of the memory palace.
Yeah, so memorizing in my eyes is two things. One is creating pictures for the things you're memorizing. That's just what I had talked about, creating those associations. And second is storage. How do you store those things in your head so that you can retrieve them later? And that's where the memory palace comes in. It's basically a clever way of thinking about these pictures and storing them in your head in a very organized manner so that they're there to be recalled without fail. And the name gets itself from ancient times when people actually lived in palaces and these grand halls. We're talking about the ancient Greeks and Romans, and what they would do is they would store their pictures in their mind of what they're memorizing in a mental map of something they already knew very well, like their palace or for us, our homes, right? Yeah. If you have a castle, sure. But if you have a regular apartment, that's fine too.
Dude,
and what you do is
so cool, man. That's really cool.
And what you do is so let's say you're memorizing a list of words, your grocery list, right? To get cheese, milk, whatever. Okay, so cheese, you're going to come up with a picture. And like I said, the more emotional, the better. So maybe you think of a time you ate cheese with your dad who's maybe passed on. And, it's something that you can really visualize. It's a special moment, right? Okay. So that picture you want to store somewhere. So you're going to imagine yourself at your front door of your house or your apartment, wherever, and you place that image there. So imagine eating that cheese with your dad at the front of your house, your doorstep. And then, okay, the next image, you have milk. So maybe you think of like a cow spraying milk out of its udders. That's your picture. It's a bit bizarre and funny. And you would place that in the next you place that in the next location of your memory palace, which would be, if you open the door to your house, it would be the entryway, right? So you're mentally walking through this space and laying down these images. And the idea is that later on, once you've stored everything, you've imagined everything in that house, all you have to do is mentally walk through it again and pick up the images you laid there. And that's essentially the recall.
Wow. All right, but the key is to actually use a structure or a facility or a building that's real, that you really know innately, like your home.
I personally think that's the best. I know some people who create memory palaces from their mind and use those, and that's fine. I just like to tie into the emotional thing, right? A house that I live in, I know very well, and it's got that cozy feeling. That's going to add to my mnemonic strength. So if you can use something better, but it doesn't have to be that way.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm thinking about some other techniques. On the PMP exam, which I help people pass, they have different domains called like initiating, planning, executing, monitoring, controlling, and closing, right?
Yeah.
And so people might initiate, what's it called when you say like, I plan every move carefully, initiate, plan, execute.
An acronym, right?
That's an acronym, right? What do you think about acronyms for memorization?
Yeah, that's great. What that really is something called chunking, right? So you take something that's, has many pieces to it, and you're basically simplifying it into one. So, you're taking all these little domains, as you said, whatever, they're 5 or something you said, and you turn it into one word that you have to remember, right? Which is a lot easier than 5 complex words. So we do this a lot with memorizing numbers. You look at a phone number, for example, and for me, I can turn that into one very vivid picture just by the strategies that I use, and that's a lot easier to remember than 7 independent digits.
That sounds like something that could be leveraged if you have to memorize a formula.
Yeah, yeah. And anything that is abstract or difficult or large in size, the better you can kind of compress that information into meaningful things, then the easier it's going to be to recall and retrieve.
Sounds like a lot of visual association to content.
Totally. It's all about that. And it's structured organization too, right? That's the memory palace thing. How you place that stuff in your head so that it's easier to get out when you need it.
So it's like, oh, where do I leave my keys? Oh, I know where my keys are. My keys are always on the kitchen counter. And so just go to your kitchen counter and there's a little memory for you.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Now, you say that you can teach anyone to memorize anything, but I want to just ask you, is that really true? Aren't there some people out there who just have crappy memory?
Look, I always say,
I mean, not with the disease or an illness. I mean, a regular person who's just got a bad memory.
Yeah. So if that's what we're talking about, I don't think that exists. I think someone who says they have a bad memory, it's just
they're not trying. They're not trying hard enough.
No, not necessarily. They just don't know how to use it properly, and that's something that you can correct. So anybody listening out there who's one of those people, which a lot of people are, they say, I just don't have a good memory. There is hope, and I've worked with people who say that all the time, and I've changed them around. So it is something you can alter.
All right. So, like, what's one freebie for the audience about if that's a person out there saying, yeah, my memory's terrible, what's one simple thing they could do daily to improve their memory?
To try. I know that sounds like the most simple thing to say.
Okay. Yeah, try to recall.
Yeah, the effort of actually trying it. And, when you think that you have a bad memory, you just kind of give up and say, you know what, I'm just going to use my phone to store this person's number, or I just have a bad memory. That's it. But you got to change that script because it's self-defeating. And if you really start to try, and by try, I mean, you're going to focus on the thing you're memorizing and really try to just be as attentive as possible to absorb that information. And just by doing that alone, forget the visualization, the memory palace, that is going to boost your memory instantly. And the more you do that, the more confidence you have in your memory and the more practice you'll get. You're strengthening that muscle.
Yeah, like any other muscle. Absolutely. Now, that's fantastic. Now, Nelson, I was checking out your LinkedIn page and I was checking out some of your collateral, and I noticed, I watched some of your videos and I was looking at Climb from Memory. So it would seem that you have this organization, Climb from Memory, which promotes Alzheimer awareness. And we know that Alzheimer is this horrible disease that's affecting people's memories. So I guess, could you tell us a little bit about Climb from Memory and the connection with how you're trying to help improve this horrible disease of Alzheimer's?
Yeah. So as I said before, my grandmother had Alzheimer's, and that's kind of what got me started on this journey. So at some point, as I was getting very knowledgeable and good at this memory improvement stuff, I decided to create a charity that would kind of bring it back full circle. I wanted to get people aware of, first of all, the techniques, and secondly, just brain health in general with a focus on Alzheimer's, right? Because I believe that if you can keep your mind sharp by exercising it, using these techniques, and eating right, and staying fit and active, there are things you can do like that to keep your mind healthy throughout its lifespan. And hopefully, results in studies aren't necessarily definitive yet, but I believe that has to have some help that you might stave off or not get Alzheimer's if that's the case.
You could even mitigate the effects of it.
Exactly. Yeah. So I started this charity as a way to do that, and the climb part comes from another passion of mine, which is climbing. I thought, why not take this cause to the highest places in the world and really get some attention? A lot of people are fascinated by Everest and these large mountains around the world, so that's why the climb part is in there. So I do a lot of climbing to raise awareness for that.
That is so awesome. The possibility of me pulling my body weight up over like a ledge is almost zero. So I have a huge amount of respect for people who can pull their own body weight up. I see that you've actually attempted to summit Mount Everest. I was watching the YouTubes. You were doing a vlog. Nice. You were doing a self video, and you were like, yeah, we're going for the summit today, but unfortunately, it looks like they're telling me I've got some symptoms of pulmonary edema. You had to turn around and go back while the rest of your team went for the summit. How depressing was that? Did you ever get back? Did you ever get to summit?
Yep, that was tough to deal with. I have not summited yet, but I've actually attempted over the years. Over the past 10 years, I've tried it 3 times, and it's just eluded me by very small margins. I've had to turn around each of those times for one reason or another.
How far away from the top were you?
My closest was 50 meters, if you can
Oh my
believe that.
God.
Yeah.
Oh,
I mean, it's 50 vertical meters, but that's very, very close.
feet.
So
yeah. All right. Well, it sounds like a guy like you is eventually going to check that off the list.
Yeah. I won't rest until I get that.
My goodness.
All
right. Let me transition here a little bit. Now, as you know, my listeners are project managers, many of whom are very interested in passing this crazy difficult exam called the PMP exam, which stands for Project Management Professional. All right. Now, there is a big body of knowledge. I shared with you a spreadsheet which had a project framework on it. There's formulas they need to memorize, and it can be so daunting. It can take people months and months to pass this test. And then they get in, they got to take a 200-question test within 4 hours. They get a little over a minute on average to answer each question. They're scenario-based. Many of them seem like they have 2 answers that are right, or even 3. All right. And so people start getting panicked and freaked out. It's a real head game on the candidate trying to pass this exam. So have you heard about the PMP exam at all? Have you worked with anybody with the PMP exam? What's your exposure with that?
Yeah, no, I think from what you showed me or told me today, it's the first encounter I've had with it.
I don't mean to put you on the spot here, but, this project management framework, okay, it has 49 project processes in it, right?
Okay.
And take, for example, there might be a process called manage quality, right? That's something you have to do on a project. Another process might be estimate your costs, right? Now, for every one of these 49 processes, there are a number of inputs. Okay, now inputs is like the gasoline going into car, right? And then there's a number of tools and techniques you apply during the process. And then there are certain relevant outputs that come out as a result of the process. So it's called ITTOs, inputs, outputs, tools, and techniques. Well, when you take 49 processes, and you consider each one of them has a few inputs, a few outputs, and a few tools and techniques, you've got over 600 ITTOs that you could potentially be asked about on this exam. Now, many people, the big question in project management is, should I try to memorize all of them? And the resounding answer from me and many other experts is, no, don't try to memorize all of them, but try to understand the ebbs and flows of how they function together, right? But I guess what I would ask you is, short of really attempting to memorize it all, or is there a way to memorize something that vast? I don't think, in my humble opinion, I don't think the Memory Palace would maybe be a perfect fit for that. How would you, a memory champion, approach trying to memorize this massive framework? How would you do it?
Yeah. Again, I mean, I don't know all the ins and outs of this yet, just on what you just said. I'd probably have to investigate further before I decided a full strategy. But that's kind of how I always start, is if I'm given something to memorize, what's the strategy of how I'm going to get this in my head, right? The most powerful way is with a memory palace. But as you said, maybe that's not the best way, because the way you have to access the information depends on a bunch of inputs, and then there's the resulting outputs. But what you can do, I mean, at some point you need to have some general knowledge of everything structured in your mind, and that to me screams a memory palace. What you can do that helps, though, because as we were doing with the list that I mentioned before, your grocery list, it's very linear, as I was saying, a memory palace, but it doesn't have to be that way. A memory palace can be a larger, broader place and have miniature places within it. So, for example, I had to memorize, what was it? It was the NFL Hall of Fame or something like that. Mm-hmm. And it's hundreds and hundreds of pieces of information. We have to know the player's name, the position, the teams he played for, and the years he played and then what year he was inducted.
So it was hierarchical. It started with the player and then decomposed down into sub components about the player.
Yeah, and I had to be able to answer questions about, okay, who were the people inducted in this year, or what was this guy's name's position, who played from these years to these years. So I had to be able to get that information in different ways. So what you do is, you try to create a structure of a memory palace that can house different concepts in one location, but maybe it's a grander scheme of things. So
all right, let me build on that for a second.
Yeah.
All right. So there's 10 knowledge areas in project management: integration, scope, schedule, cost, quality, resources, procurement, stakeholder, right? There's 10 knowledge areas.
Got it. Okay.
So could I create a memory palace where I walk in and I say, okay, the first room I walk into, the foyer, it's integration. And I know that inside that room, there's 5 things. There is develop project charter. There is develop project management plan. There is direct and manage project work, monitor project knowledge. And could I do it like that? And then each room that I go to is a knowledge area?
Yeah, you could do that. Because the nice thing about a memory palace is once you're in a room, for example, you can, you're thinking of it maybe from your full-size human perspective, but you can shrink yourself and imagine that room to be as big as you need it to be to fill with as much information as you want, right? So every little corner of a lamp that you have there could store information. The outlet on the wall could hold something. You're just going to make a loop around that room, choosing distinct locations to store an image for something.
You have to revisit the room over and over and over. You're not going to do it one time and then go back there and remember where it all is, are you?
No, I mean, with larger sets of data, you will need to review. But the nice thing about a memory palace is once it's in your head, you can just close your eyes and imagine the space. You don't have to visit the real place. Just by closing your eyes and walking that route in your mind is like review in itself.
Wow, that's so cool.
And what you can do is on top of that, because I'm looking at the sheet you gave me, right? So you have integration, for example, and you were saying all the different develop project charter, develop project management plan, but you also have the vertical columns, right? Initiating, planning, executing.
The process groups.
The process groups. So you could give each process group some kind of attribute. So maybe you can give it a verb, right? So for initiating, you can think of, and you try to make them very specific. So I don't know, a verb for initiating, you can tap into something that emotional thing. So like maybe you're making out, you're kissing someone, right? Right. So the action of getting intimate with someone, initiating that kind of action, right? And I choose that because it brings up another thing, right? I'm saying that we often remember things that are very bizarre, violent, sexual in nature. So if you want to tap into that, go for it. Anyway, so the point is like somehow you're going to include and develop project charter something about sex or something that reminds you of it. So that way it has to do with initiating as the process, And it's in the integration. It's in the integration memory palace room, so that it's part of those where those two intersect.
All right, let me ask you this: if initiation is kissing, what's executing?
Yeah, so I leave that up to you.
That's a rhetorical question.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. All right, so it's cool though because this test that you go in and take, the testing center, they give you blank paper, and once the test starts, it's supposed to be used for scratch paper, but everybody and their cousin, what they do is they have all the stuff memorized. They know they can't remember it forever. And so as soon as they give them the paper, they do what's called a memory dump, a brain dump.
So they just write it all down. Yeah.
And they just write it all down, right? Like when you were in high school and the gym teacher, the science teacher would say, I'll let you fill as much as you can onto a 3x5 card, right?
Yeah, of course.
What do you think about that whole concept of having a brain dump, having this sheet of paper where you just quickly get, you have this stuff memorized when you walk into the test center. As soon as they give you that paper, you just drop it all down on the paper, and then you don't have to freak out during the exam because you can just look at the paper.
Yeah. I mean, there's an argument for that. I mean, once it's externalized on a piece of paper that isn't going to forget itself, that's kind of a relief in a way.
But what I'm hearing from
people,
you is if you have this memory palace thing going and these other techniques, you might not even need that.
Exactly. Yeah. So I would do that. I mean, and you must be wasting time, right? When you have to write that all down.
It's true.
Oh.
And they used to give you time before the test started to do it, and now they make you do it during the test. So.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, if you have it properly, organized in your head, I wouldn't even bother with the dump, and that would save you some time.
All right, cool. Now, let me ask you, if people have trouble remembering things during this exam and they're getting panicked, right?
Yeah.
People look at the timer, they see the timer counting down. I don't know, maybe you're not a psychologist. Any tips or tricks for people who went into the exam, they felt like they had stuff memorized, they thought they were good to go, and now they're having a panic attack in the middle of, they're having trouble recalling. Anything you could recommend?
Yeah, I mean, memory, unfortunately, is tied to stress, right? If you're very stressed, you can suddenly just blank, right? And that's the worst feeling in the world because you know stuff, but then suddenly you can't get it.
Suddenly you don't know it,
Yeah, but that's kind of the positive of these techniques that I'm talking about is because you're tapping into things that are so emotionally tagged to you, it's easier to retrieve them, even under situations of stress. So just by using these techniques alone, it should help with that. Outside of that, though, of course, there are other things that can help you forget. But I am a big believer in people training for the things and in the same settings that they're going to be doing it. So, yeah, sure, when you're at home studying in quiet, no pressure, that's easy. But why not try to do some of this work like you're going to do on the test while doing something that's high stress? For example,
like in the middle of Starbucks or something.
Yeah, in a public place with like some construction happening outside, with your kids running around distracting you, or when you're on a treadmill, right? When your heart rate is elevated, try to recall some of this information or have someone quiz you, some of these difficult scenarios that you can put yourself in.
So it's like training to be a Navy SEAL. It's like, dude, I can hold my breath for 7 minutes underwater. It's like, I think I can swim 50 yards across the swimming pool. Right, yeah, I got you. So you want to just try things with as many different diverse scenarios as possible, so that once you get to the real thing, it's almost like second nature.
Yeah, can you imagine you train with someone yelling at you all the time, and then suddenly you sit down for the test and it's absolute silence? You'd be like,
right,
wow, okay. I mean, you'll still be nervous, but it'll be a different. It'll be a little calmer.
That's awesome, Nelson. Well, I can't tell you how much I've learned today. This was really fantastic, and I really appreciate you taking the time with me today. Nelson Dellis, author of the upcoming book, Remember It, coming out in September, available everywhere for pre-order currently. Please visit nelsondellis.com to see more about what Nelson is involved in. Please check out Climb for Memory, such an important cause with Alzheimer's, and thank you so much for doing it. Really appreciate your time today, Nelson.
Yeah, you got it. I'm happy to be here, and good luck to everybody taking that test.
Thank you so much. They're going to need it. I really appreciate your time today, Nelson.